Just make sure it's on. Oh, it is. Yeah, never mind.
Is there one?
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to call the November 4th, 2019 Committee of the Whole to order at 6 p.m. And I would like to acknowledge that we are meeting on the shared traditional lands of the Coast Salish people. And first item on the agenda is 2.1, Committee of the Whole agenda. Before I proceed any further, the mayor would like to address the committee.
Thank you. Council, 5.1, which is the rezoning application for 360 Latoria. The proponent has asked for this to be removed from the agenda. The company would like to actually engage the public first before moving forward. They've already had one open house and they're looking to have a second open house. So I'm making a motion to have this removed from the agenda.
Don't need a second.
Well, so, sorry, I guess through the chair to staff, when I make that motion, that's just an amendment to the agenda, correct? Yeah, so it's just, I would move the agenda with that change for approval.
Okay, thank you. Any discussion? Councillor Dave?
Thank you. Sorry, managing with my very large laptop here. I'm trying to hide behind the screen. I just wanted to clarify, if I may, with staff. There's a number of residents here who came with the intention of speaking to council tonight, and I just would like clarification for them if they are still able to give any feedback to council at this point in time. So that's kind of what I was thinking. So if you've made an extra effort to be here tonight, I'm sure that council would be interested in hearing your point of view, despite us not having that specifically on the agenda tonight.
Councillor Day, I will be permitting it. Any other discussion? Michael?
I just wanted to clarify something as well. So we could still carry on and discuss it, but I think the reason not to discuss it is because if the developer is planning a meeting with the residents around, presumably he's going to come back with at least some changes, in which case we'll be discussing something. Yeah, okay.
Any other councillor? I'll call the question then. All in favor? Oh, that's unanimous. Yes, I'd like a motion to adopt the agenda as amended. Okay. Councillor Chanson, any discussion? Call the question. All in favor? Okay, that's unanimous. Okay, item 3.1, Committee of the Whole, October 21st. I would like to ask a motion to adopt the minutes of the October 21st Committee of the Whole meeting.
So moved, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Any discussion? Councilor Parkinson.
Thank you, Your Worship. I noticed that under the third quarter budget review report, there was a line in there that committee asked that staff bring forward a briefing to council regarding bus stop improvement project cost overruns. That's great. But what we didn't have under the first one on the budget timeline, we didn't talk about our request for a discussion of the tax rates and also the sustainable infrastructure. So I think we discussed those, and they probably should be reflected in the minutes with a note. Oh, yeah, I guess I've got that bad habit. Okay, let me see if I can be clear. Under the third quarter budget report, we have the motion that's moved, and then under the second half of it, we have that be recommended to council the $35,000 for bus stops. There's a note underneath that that says, committee asks that staff bring forward a briefing to council regarding bus stop improvement project cost overruns. On the first motion that the third quarter budget report 2009 be received, at that time we discussed asking for a review of the tax rates before the last minute as we got into this year, and also a further discussion on the sustainable infrastructure, because we have just sort of talked about doing it this fiscal year but haven't really decided what we're doing going forward. So I just think a note to both those so they don't get lost would be appropriate.
Comments by Director of Corporate Services.
Yes, I just wanted to confirm Councillor Parkinson is correct. The discussion did happen on those items, and the Director of Finance confirmed at the meeting that those things were already incorporated into the upcoming process. So you will get those reports.
Thank you. Any other discussion? Call the question. All in favor as amended? Okay, that's unanimous. Okay, item 4. I'll just read this. I'm going to invite the public to take this opportunity to comment on tonight's agenda items and advise that additional opportunities will be provided at each agenda item, as well as during the final public participation at the end of the meeting. I would like to advise that council cannot receive comments on matters where a public hearing has been held until the bylaw regarding the matter has been adopted. 20 minutes will be allotted to the public participation period, and I'm going to limit it to 20 minutes for each of the agenda items and 20 minutes at the end. I just want to remind the public that when they come forward to speak, to state your name and your address for the record. Thank you very much. Anyone? First speaker.
Is this on? Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is John English. I live at 401 Proctor Place. Can I ask a question about the minutes from the last meeting? I was in attendance. I'm not a member, of course, but the Chief Financial Officer did say that in development, he was asked a question by one of the councillors about whether or not the city is able to cover the costs of...
Excuse me, Mr. English, could you speak right into the mic?
Okay.
Thank you.
At the last meeting, the Chief Financial Officer was asked if the city is able to cover its costs with new residential development. And he said that he felt the city was able to cover its direct costs, but not the operating costs. The implications being that taxes are going to have to go up. I didn't see that in the minutes, and so I wondered if is it appropriate even for me to raise that? I'm not a council member, of course.
I'm going to turn that question over to the CEO.
Through the chair to the gentleman at the mic. we don't take verbatim minutes, so often there is a lot of discussion that happens back and forth it doesn't become a part of the official record. If there's any direction given by council or key points raised that were perhaps not covered in the report that was attached, we would certainly include that. I hope that helps.
Thanks, Selena.
Okay, well, if I may continue then. A number of people are concerned about what they've heard in terms of development at 360 Latoria. So I'd like to speak to that. And I guess I should start by saying it's been pointed out to me that in the letter that I sent to each of you on October 28th, that the property was zoned for 5 stories, not the 3 stories that I had assumed based on the townhouses that were there. However, also point out that it's certainly not zoned for 6 stories either. So currently, I'm told that only 7% of the City of Colwood's revenues come from commercial sources. That was considered in the development of the OCP, which a number of us in the gallery here and the community participated in, and in updating it. And it's interesting because like 4 times a given piece of property generates 4 times the amount of revenue for the City of Colwood if it's from a commercial application as opposed to residential. That being said, that was recognized in the OCP development, and there were mixed use areas identified for the purpose of having commercial enterprises move in and generate more revenue for the City of Colwood and help us taxpayers out. Well, it's interesting, some of our neighbors did some calculations. What the developer, I gather it's district development from Vancouver, what they are proposing or had proposed to do that they've withdrawn from tonight is to actually build those buildings seeking variances from the city on parking and height. And they're only going to use 4% of all that space for commercial activities. Well, I mean, really, that says to us that in essence what they're doing is they're asking for exemptions for something that is really going to be a residential community, and a high density one at that. So there's a number of things problematic with that. The customers are also, for those businesses, a coffee shop and a convenience store, are expected to share 6 parking spaces with residents. And that, to most of us who've been in business, we don't really see that as a sincere plan to establish viable businesses. It really begs a lot of questions about how sincere they are. The other point is that it's incompatible. What was proposed is incompatible with the OCP with respect to existing view corridors, which the OCP says that are to be respected and maintained to the extent possible. Doesn't seem to be much respect being shown to the existing Colwood property owners and homeowners. And there's also an issue with respect to shadows from bigger buildings. That's identified in the OCP as an issue that the city is going to manage for the benefit of everybody. But I can tell you for sure, having walked around that area and from the people that live in that area, that there's going to be homes in permanent shadow from those buildings. So that's not acceptable either. The buildings, they don't fit into the neighborhood at all. I mean, what is in that neighborhood are townhomes and other residential homes. So again, they're looking to build a multi-story, high-density residential big building right in the middle of much lower density locations, which is going to negatively affect people's views, the traffic, the parking, their quality of life, and their property values. So that's not very respectful treatment for existing homeowners in Colwood. So, so what we would like to do is see things, I guess, see more integrity to the process. There hasn't, before I came here tonight, I received a phone or an email from Brent Molnar about 15 minutes before we left the house, and it was saying that the developers panicked or something. Those are not the right words. I'm sorry, I shouldn't impute words. The developer has decided that he would like to withdraw from the item from discussion tonight because he wants to consult with the neighbors. And well, there's a lot of neighbors here that haven't been consulted with. And the idea that only people living within 75 meters of that building are affected is nonsensical. You can look at the people that live up on the ridge, you can look at the people that live in around Ryder Hedgestall Drive, and it's quite clear that there are a lot of people that need to be consulted with, and there was lots of opportunity to do so, and there haven't been. And I don't know about the open house, but I haven't seen it. I haven't seen any notion at all of that. We walked by the placard that was up there saying that there was an application to build 6 stories, and most people hadn't seen that. So I think the people here are feeling that they're not being treated with respect. They want to be treated with respect. It is, for most people, some of the biggest investments that they're ever going to make in their lives, and they shouldn't be trifled with. They should be respected. Many of us contributed an awful lot to this community, both in taxes and in volunteer work, and also in helping the city update its OCP. And now we find that it's going off the rails. So we would respectfully request that this committee, the mayor and council, step up and start protecting us, the citizens and taxpayers and voters of the city of Colwood. Thank you, and I'll turn it over to other people.
Thank you, Mr. English. Does anyone else have anything to add? Please.
Hello, Art Ramirez, 3457 Curlew Street. I'm actually on the new face of Latoria, and I believe that John made all the points, I should say, most of the points that many of us, including the areas that are not immediately next to the proposed development, feel. One thing that I would like to add, though, is that I went on Google Earth just over the weekend trying to find similar developments around high schools, never mind the largest secondary school in the province. So I looked at Belmont Secondary. Do we have anything similar there? No, nothing but fields. So you have access for people going to drop off their kids. What do you have in Oak Bay? Again, no 6-story buildings. So why are we considering that here in Colwood, where we have Metchosin, which is a 30-kilometer zone during the dawn to dusk, and having to get to Ryder Hedgestall from that area is problematic to begin with. Now you're proposing to have the 6-story building, 3 to 6, fine, number of buildings, right next to this largest secondary in BC. It just does not make sense. And that's something that has not been reflected in the documents that I have seen provided by the developer. All the comparisons, of course, were to some cookie cutter type of formula that they use, but it does not reflect the fact that, again, it's the largest secondary in the school, and that there are no major thoroughfares at this point in the area for all that traffic to exit, to move out during the peak hours. So I applaud the development. I believe that the development has to go forward in Colwood. I personally support it. I know that in this, I diverge from John's feelings, but I don't believe that the location is good. I think that at the very least, it should be across the street, at the very least, and even that is problematic. So I just wanted to add that because, as I said, you can see the people here. I would dare say that 99% of the people here today are from the area. I'm very concerned about this. So I don't want to take more of the time, but I wanted to make sure that that point was made. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Anyone else?
I wasn't going to say anything, but a microphone. Colleen Brownlee, number 132, 3640 Propeller Place. which is part of Royal Bay, and I used to live in Royal Bay here. And I understand, Mayor and Council, that you have a challenge before you. You have a development and developers who want to develop. And having been in the Royal Bay area before it was actually going to be developed, when it was still a gravel pit, I think everybody within the area was really looking forward to it. And I do recall that the original developers of Royal Bay did spend a lot of time with the community and having open houses that were meaningful, so that indeed an area could be developed that was going to be the best of everything, and that Colwood could be really proud of. But I think by doing that, they listened to the people. And I'm not sure that where we are today, if the people are being really listened to. And I know that people don't necessarily understand why only people within the 75-meter range are communicated with, but that's within your bylaw. That's sort of the normal course of events. But that does not preclude or prevent council from reaching out to others. And I think the more people that reach out, you'll find that more people come out. You want people to volunteer, and people do volunteer willingly because we are proud of Colwood. But we would like to be prouder because we would like to ensure that as residents of Colwood, we are listened to. Do you have to do everything that people want done? Of course not. But you have to take into consideration the good, bad, and the ugly, so that you are very knowledgeable and have as much information as possible to make the best decision possible for the city of Colwood, more importantly, the residents of Colwood. Finances are always critical to what's happening, and you need the finances not only to maintain the building, but you need to sustainability, and that's going to cost money. So how much do we as taxpayers have to pay more? I do have one question, though, just for clarification. Did I recall that when the hotel was built on Whale Road, was there a tax deferral for a 10-year period? And where are we in that 10-year period now? Does anybody?
I believe we're probably year 7, somewhere between year 6 and year 7. Because I've been on council 8 years, and,
Right.
and I remember voting for it. So it definitely has not got to the 10-year yet.
So with that tax deferral, is my assumption correct? We know what we do if we assume something. But is my assumption correct that we as the taxpayers are picking up the taxes that Colwood's not getting? Because where does the funding come from?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely correct.
Okay, just wanted that for clarification. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Mayor and Council, my name is Daryl Dramel. My wife and I live at 3545 Proudfoot Place. And we built the house about 12 years ago. After much consultation and research, I worked for the Saanich Fire Department for 35 years, so I have a fair amount of understanding of development. I was the Chief Fire Prevention Officer there, did a lot of plan checking for 25 years. I saw huge changes in communities. We moved from Esquimalt out this way because we wanted quality. The community was older where we lived in the Gorge area, and it was changing. High density was coming in. Homes were being knocked down. We didn't like that. What we saw in Royal Bay was the future. We saw something similar to Uplands, I suppose, or out in Royal Oak. And the way things were developed in those areas, we thought, well, okay, this is something that we'd be proud of. Our grandchildren are proud of, our children are proud of. When I see high density in an area with so much open property, I wonder why. And there's only one reason that's driven, and that's obviously someone's trying to make a buck. I believe that there needs to be development. It's got to be quality development. Development that is in keeping with the neighborhood. The neighborhood that I moved into are very high-end homes, beautifully kept, and to that end, there was a standard to be kept. It's changing, and with a change that is being proposed for this property, I don't see that adding value to what is there now. You should be trying to build upon what is a real jewel there. So my sense is that there needs to be a rethink on this. And I really think that anything that is being done should be in keeping with what is good for the municipality, not necessarily good for the developer. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, please, come on up, please.
Okay, my name is Wei Ming Jian, 406 Proct Place. I just want to make a quick comment regarding the process of approving any applications to revise the previous plan. And before I moved over here, I was a leading scientist with a federal government organization. So I went enough meetings in my career and know how to make plan and change the plan. But I'm a little puzzled here after I come over here. And we saw the development after I moved here. And then we got the open house, we got the community planning process. Looks to me it's very nice and perfect. We got input from all different parties. However, and we also see you spend all this time and with community, with the city staff, everybody working hard, you put things in writing, and then all of a sudden somebody come over and then say, okay, we want to change it. And then looks to me and also have good chance to get passed with the change. So I'm just thinking, we spend all this time already, maybe we should put more respect on the time already put in there, and then be really serious and careful when we approve any new changes, unless there is a solid and legitimate reason. And it's not because simply some person or organization want to make more money or something like that. So a broad, more comprehensive consideration, I think, is more important than any individual interest from individual. That's my point. Thanks.
Thank you.
Lana McPhail, 367 Longworth. I didn't expect to talk either. I'd like to talk a little bit about community. After Halloween, there was a Twitter I read from someone in Victoria, and he talked about how Fairfield no longer has the children coming for Halloween. And he said, Royal Bay is the new Fairfield. That really hit me because that's what I bought into. That's what I love. I love my neighborhood. I'm retired. I walk every day, all over the place at all hours. I feel safe. Watching the new development has been really beautiful. The houses are gorgeous. They're families. I watch them all the time. Moms, dads, dogs, little children. It's really important, and it's really special. And when I go down that way, and I imagine what's going to possibly be built in that one area, it breaks my heart. It breaks my heart for the people that have bought into this vision, have brought their families there to grow, to go to school, to be a part of a community. And I really believe that's what was being built there, a community. And I really ask you not to break that up. Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Warren Brown. I'm at 3529 Proudfoot Place. When we bought into Royal Bay, there were a lot of expectations set. The salespeople said, look at this lovely area below us. It's going to be developed kind of like Point Grey. And we said, well, maybe. And then Gablecraft came along and said, look at this wonderful community. We're going to grow a lovely community of single-family dwellings and townhouses. Well, maybe. It astounds me that Gablecraft has now sold off a chunk of land which they had formerly promised to put a family center on, a community center on. We knew that wasn't going to happen, but maybe. So I'm concerned here that maybe it was a quick way to make a dollar for Gablecraft, and to invite a developer in, and we don't know what the terms of the conditions of that sale are. But I wonder where they're at in terms of understanding whether they could maybe make money at 3 stories. Could be. So I think we should hold them to what the community standard is, not the standard that they want to build. Let's take a look at that piece of property and look at what the current zoning is and understand how it might be handled so that it can fit into the community, and not how someone who wants to build in the community will build in that community. So our understanding here is you're looking at quite a large group of people here who are concerned. And it's not life or death, but it's a concern, and I hope you will take that into consideration.
Thank you very much. Okay, if we've got 1 more minute here. Anyone else? Thank you.
Hello, Mayor and Council. My name is Dwight Brewster, 402 Longworth. I would just like to reiterate what others have said about the community plan and generally waivers. What's the use of having bylaws if they're just waived because somebody wants them to be waived, mostly for greed? Thank you.
Okay, that's the time limit here. Like to thank, oops, one more. We'll let you come up.
Hi, Mayor and Council. I'm Jason Ambo, 3474 Sparrowhawk Avenue. I'd just like to express my extreme disappointment in the latest response received from the developer with respect to the September 16 concerns from the last meeting. With the minimal changes that they proposed, it's just extremely disappointing that they're really not taking forth the community's questions into consideration there. I'd also like to just show briefly here a brochure from 2017 from the Royal Bay real estate group. When we purchased here, it shows clearly a neighborhood house here, and I'll just they call it out on the main map, but also in the section over here. I'd be happy to share it after. Meet friends for Friday night cocktails, or family for Sunday brunch at one of several fine food and drink establishments in the neighborhood house, and they clearly show a community-focused area over here with families gathering in a public space. And I'm just, with the change of direction to propose here, with the latest request, is extremely disappointing. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm just not sure when we're will there be other opportunities for us to discuss? I don't want to go over the time limit. Just, will there be more opportunities for us to discuss this proposal?
At this particular meeting, there will be an opportunity at the end. Also, as the mayor had announced, the developer wants to re-engage the public to have more public discussion on this. And there's still a public hearing that has to be held on all this anyways. So there will be quite a few other opportunities. Does that answer your question?
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Go ahead.
Sorry, I'm not aware of the processes. So how will I guess my question is, how will I know the next process? Like when's the next open house or the next discussion about these proposed changes, both by the developer and by council?
As far as I know, it's announced in the newspaper and on the Colwood website, correct? And I'll go to staff on.
Through the chair, so the public open houses that the developer holds are a courtesy because the formal place to hear input is at the council table here, as you've outlined. There will be processes, but as this comes back to the agenda, as the developer brings it forward to come back to the agenda after they've held another open meeting, it'll be on the agenda through the city's website. I would encourage you to check often. We'll be posting updates about this specific file on that website on a site called Let's Talk. You give us about a week to do so. But otherwise, the agenda as reviewed by committee will be on the website, and then as it goes from committee to council, there's 4 readings that are necessary, of which public hearing forms a part part of that process, and the public is invited for your formal opportunity to speak to council about the specific application at that public hearing.
Thank you very much. Okay, on that note, I'm going to close the public participation and go on to item 5, old business. 5.1, rezoning application. Whoops. Oh, that's right. Nope, sorry. Jump over that one. We jump on to 6, new business. 6.1, 3159 Antrobus Crescent, license of occupation agreement. And just give the audience 30 seconds to leave. Yeah. If you want to tell them that. Yep. If anyone would like to leave, I won't restart this. I thought you all came out to see me chair my first meeting. That's quite a disappointment. Yes. I love eating it. I eat my kids for dinner. Yeah. Who's Deanna eating? Who's she? Okay, we will continue on. As I said, 3159 Antrobus Crescent, license of occupation agreement. And I guess I'm going to invite Brent, because Deanna, I don't see Deanna here, to introduce the item to the team. Thank you.
Thank you. There's no PowerPoint to go along with this introduction today, so we are considering a license of occupation for boulevard improvements at 3159 Antrobus Crescent. The proponent has been very, very approachable and workable by staff, and would frankly like to improve their boulevard fronting their property. The works that they're proposing includes minor Allen block retaining walls and some landscape features, which go outside of their property line onto the city boulevard. Because there is a desire to acknowledge that those are private property works on city lands, and that they're the responsibility of the homeowner to maintain, the city is proposing a license of occupation to allow those works, and is requesting council to consider that license of occupation. So the recommendation is that the report titled 3159 Antrobus Crescent License of Occupation Agreement be received, and that it be recommended to council that a license of occupation agreement be approved for the owners of 3159 Antrobus Crescent for the landscape improvements within the city boulevard. I'm here to address any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much. Before I take it to committee here, I'd like to provide an opportunity for the public to comment. Okay, seeing none, can I get a mover?
Sure, go ahead, Stuart. You can move it.
Stuart?
I'll second.
Councilor Parkinson, Mayor, second. Okay, open up for discussion.
Oh, sorry, Councilor Day.
Or you- Go ahead.
Sorry, my question is the motion that's on the table the recommendation?
Mhm.
Okay. I didn't hear what the motion was. So I have a number of questions. Are you ready for questions at this time?
Fire
Okay.
away.
So the term license of occupation, when I looked that up, it appears to be a term related to the use of Crown lands as authorized by the Provincial Ministry of Environment. Is there a bylaw that refers to this?
Through the chair, no, there is not. The license of occupation can apply to municipal lands as well for the purposes of works and services installed under a partnership agreement with the proponent. So this is something that the engineering department hasn't used prior. However, acknowledging that there are intents to occupy portions of land, other proponents may install a pipe on city property to get access to another piece of property. This is one of the recommended procedures for handling works that will essentially befall to the city without the premise of a license of occupation.
Thank you. So under the summary in the report, it says that staff was given direction in June on this matter. When was the direction given and why?
So once we became aware, once I myself became aware of the works intruding upon the city right-of-way and the degree and scope of those works, if it was licensed or if it was a matter of a shrub, it might be easy to deal with, but because these are actual retaining structures that are part of the right-of-way, they have the way of impacting the boulevard space. And as you can see from the pictures that are attached on page 67 of your agenda package, the works are excellent. They have included very, very high degree of landscaping, and it shows ownership intent over the right-of-way that is the private property intrusion onto the public lands. Because of that, we felt that the best method, and staff has given direction to proceed with the license of occupation and advise their proponents that that's the method we would ask council to consider.
Okay, so there was no complaint?
These aren't a matter of complaint. These are a matter of staff preserving the right-of-way for the occupation and use of the municipality's undertaking. As you'll note, there are no sidewalks on this area here, or no improvements to the area. So people that extend their works and services out and beyond their private property is an intrusion into the public sphere. Because of that, staff typically work to remove those intrusions, but you'll note that the value and degree of, I'm going to say, pride and ownership of the community is evident. Here, they've done good works. We felt it prudent to ask council their consideration on it. If council chose not to enter a license of occupation, the property owners would be instructed to remove the works.
Okay, just the issue coming up, I had a careful look at the area, and I did also notice that there's no sidewalks and there's no other infrastructure that's envisioned for the area, but there do appear to be some fairly mature trees, and those things are likely to have long-term benefits to the city: greenhouse gas reduction, beautification, all those things. There's a number of places within the city where that type of arrangement has existed for many, many years. So I'm just curious if we're trying to discourage people from maintaining the boulevard, or why do we expect the complete removal of the improvements once the term of the agreement has ended?
So the city has a bylaw that actually requests that property owners maintain their frontage as though it was their own property. So that includes mowing, clearing of debris from sidewalk areas and surfaces, and even clearing of snow and ensuring that the drainage is actually appropriate. In regards to the permanency of the works here, I think that we'd work around some of the landscape features. It's the impediments such as the wall that would likely go. The tree we would just landscape out into back the slope edge, because I agree, it provides a benefit to the community. We have a lot of instances where people have taken this sort of pride and ownership. I think it's something that, personally, I believe that's something that needs to be encouraged. So we'd, again, work with the property owner if council did not agree to license of occupation to remove the surfacing, such as the hard surface, such as the retaining wall, and keep some of the landscape improvements, but just have a clear statement to the property owners that they were the city's property at that point.
So my question is, basically, I lost count between that location and City Hall today, trying to take note of how many places where boulevard improvements exist that are substantive enough to be noticed at any rate. And so this seems to be a new policy which would affect many residents in Colwood. We could end up doing an awful lot of these. So is there a plan to bring this forward so that all residents are consulted about how we're going to deal with this going forward?
So the consideration that's brought before you today is not the creation of a policy. The license of occupation is a municipal intent that's enabled through the legislation and doesn't need to be policy driven. The consideration that's before you is, do you agree to allow this proponent to enter into a license of occupation? No, it was not staff's intention to backcast in time. However, to move forward with the solid principle that where works impede upon the right-of-way, that we do need to take an ownership stance of the right-of-way to preserve it for the intent of council, which has been outlined through our bylaw and through the transportation master plan to include improvements such as landscaping, sidewalks, and other infrastructure works. So where in about we are brought into the loop about these improvements, yes, we plan to take positive action to try and preserve the right-of-way as best as possible, and where we think that the improvement provides a value, to bring that to council for this sort of consideration.
Okay. So my last point really is I'm concerned about the amount of work that this potentially could create, and with you, you know, the Director of Engineering Services being the point person on the file, that's not necessarily workable. If we're going to start doing this, then I think in fairness, you can't single out one, and thereby there's going to be an awful lot of these that are required. I really feel that this is a policy that the community should be allowed to weigh in on, because even if you're not calling it a policy, it's trying to open a can of worms and pick one out. And I think that's potentially a financial issue for the city going forward. Because it's, you know, where are we going to put our effort? And effort is money, basically. And many of our streets were developed before they were required to build out the boulevards, maybe properly, or, you know, not necessarily having parking even being considered in many of the older parts of Colwood. And so I think that is definitely an issue, and it could be an issue in the future where, you know, the city could be entering into a degree of work that might not really be beneficial for the amount that it's costing to do it. Thank you.
Councilor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, I have to say I'm quite jealous of the works, because the work that has been done on that property is actually quite stunning, and that wall is fantastic. And you know, I do live around the corner, and I do see it every day. Kind of following up on where since Councillor Day was going there, is we had received dealt with a similar issue actually just down the street, probably about 7 months ago, where although it didn't contain a wall, but there was some improvements done on the city boulevard that included stone and a flower bed and some nice tasteful plantings, and it became an issue here. And I, you know, I guess when I saw this, I'm trying to, and again, perhaps it's the wall, but I'm trying to differentiate what the difference would be from some stone along the curb to the lawn that I maintain and mow. It's just a different medium. But my lawn isn't an issue, but adding stone and perhaps some plantings within the road right-of-way is an issue. So I'm wondering if there's some improvement that we can make to a bylaw or whatnot to say, you know what, in that situation, in a neighborhood like this, and you can drive around Antrobus, and there's, you could probably count 10 properties that have done some really tasteful improvements on there, that would be permitted, that a staff wouldn't have to spend any time on, and nor would council. And recognize that if we expect the residents to maintain this property, that there should be some degree of flexibility in how they maintain it, you know. And I certainly don't receive a permit when I change or repair the irrigation system, or top dress it and seed it and that sort of thing. So I'm, you know, is there something that we can do, I guess, Brent, that we could address something to make it easier for you and the homeowners?
So interestingly enough, this is the subtleties that isn't necessarily come always before council. Irrigation systems are intended to be for the boulevard or private property. We allow private property irrigation systems to overstretch, for example. But you can imagine if you were working to install some works of a municipal undertaking, you ended up ripping out somebody's irrigation system, that could be a problem. So irrigation systems generally have a rule, for example, that please overspray and please work onto that, but try and keep it on your own property as best as possible. Yes, there is complete flexibility in terms of allowing a resident to improve their frontage. We do have a bylaw that says please mow it. So in regards to soft surfacing, and landscape improvements that are easily picked up, moved, and perhaps replanted, where we're not likely to cause offense to the community by doing so, those would not be a factor of license of occupation. The factor here that brings us together is the hard surfacing. And these typically haven't gone to councils before because there hasn't been a known mechanism that's to staff to bring these factors in, and staff continuously apply that discretionary factors to control time. As I've indicated, it is no intention of staff to go backwards in time. People's assumed right and their pride in their frontage should be something that we should encourage in all aspects, my belief. However, where it causes a physical impediment, such as installed walls or features like that, staff do act to preserve our future rights as a municipal entity to install improvements in those areas, and typically work to pull hard surface works outside of the right-of-way limits.
Councillor Baxter.
I'd just like to clarify, partly to set Councillor Day's mind at rest, partly just to make sure we all understand what the situation is, that for at least decades that I know of, a lot of these types of improvement in the boulevard have been dealt with by the city through some means of documentation, and that documentation has sometimes not been perhaps the legally best form of documentation. At other times it's been better. But they are nonetheless documented in many cases. I could not possibly say what percentage of cases, because I don't believe anybody's ever done a survey, but certainly by driving from one point to another point, noting all of the intrusions on the right-of-way, that tells you nothing, because a lot of these may already be documented. And a lot of them have been to council in the past. And I'm sure people who've been on the Transportation and Public Works Committee in the past can recall dealing with, for instance, a fence that was put on public right-of-way, and many other examples. So this has a long history, and I don't believe once they're documented that they generally make any work whatsoever. But I think the documentation is necessary to make sure everybody's rights are known and protected.
Thank you very much. Any other comments? Thank you.
So the last thing that's really sticking in my mind is about perception, and you know, we heard Councillor Logan speaking glowingly about really enjoying the way that this particular beautification has been done. But then, you know, there's different strokes for different folks. I mean, some people like really natural things, you know, some people like really refined things. So I'm just feeling a little uncomfortable, and so I'm putting it out there out loud, that interpretation and that judgment about whether you know, this boulevard improvement or that boulevard improvement is good or so-so, or however you choose to look at it. I think what the city needs to do is develop its policy based on, you know, if you want to put in a sidewalk, you need to be able to put in a sidewalk. Or if you need to put in some sort of services, then you need to be able to put it in. But to just tell somebody after, 20 years or 25 years, whatever you pick, that, yes, but after 25 years, the agreement says you have to remove everything. And that's the wording of the agreement. And I've been here for long enough to have seen many of them change over time. Sometimes they've been required, sometimes they haven't been required. I know probably about 10 years ago we had a lot of requirements for highway use permits. So if somebody had put gravel in and filled in a ditch, or there was a lot of those types of permits coming forward. And the view of council of the day, it was very, can't think what the word is for that, but it was not consistently applied. It was different cases for different scenarios. So I'm just feeling a little bit uncomfortable. I don't want to say no to these people being able to have what they want in front of the yard. I want to preserve the city's rights to do any upgrade that they feel necessary for a community. But I don't want to see people denied the ability to have their boulevard in a way that's easy for them to look after or whatever, makes them feel like they want to take care of it, which I think is the case in this instance, unnecessarily. That there isn't that political interference in us deciding, we like flower beds, but we don't like something else. And they seem to be very one of a kind at this point in time. So I really wish we would have some wording that kept things for the city so that it's safe, and if we need to do something in the future, it's well understood how we do that. But it doesn't place that value judgment on, yes, you did it good enough, so of course we'll support it, or, it was a meh development, so we're not. I'm just really not clear on where we are in terms of what's approved and what isn't approved, and why we would take something out and why we wouldn't.
Brent, you want?
One of the benefits for bringing forth a consideration such as this is to allow affected parties to be aware of the council agenda, the committee agenda, and to allow them to speak without a license of occupation or some sort of consideration along those lines. There's very little opportunity for the public to speak out. An example of where this could be applied is a recent consideration, I think within the last 2 years, about a proponent wishing to install AstroTurf. Was debated back and forth at the committee and council table quite numerously. That could have simply been a matter of license of occupation, because it's people are investing money beyond plants that can be relocated and worked with the property owner. I suggest that as a potential consideration. If committee wished to see a policy, that could always be drafted.
I'm going to call the question, and just to reiterate what the resolutions are. Number one, that the report titled 3159 Antrobus Crescent License of Occupation Agreement be received, number one. And number two, that a license of occupation agreement be approved for the owners of 3159 Antrobus Crescent for landscape improvements within the city boulevard. So all in favor? All opposed? Just one. Councillor Day is in opposition. Okay, moving on. 6.2, Business License Bylaw. I'd like to invite Richard up to introduce the item.
Thank you. So we're here tonight because the province has brought in legislation to enable ride-hailing, such as Uber, Lyft, and other similar companies, and this has affected our ability to issue business licenses. And rather than just deal with this as a one-off item, staff have brought forward a couple of items for council consideration to go and update our business license bylaw. The first one is looking at having exemptions in place for Ubers and taxis. Second is looking at including fees for license updates and transfers. Also having options for temporary use permit licensing. There's a proposal from the province as well for us to look at an intercommunity business license agreement. And staff are also suggesting a policy to deal with license refusals, suspensions, and cancellations. And since we're talking about fees, council also has the option to look at whether or not they want to increase fees for business licenses. So item 1, ride hailing. Recently, in September of this year, the province has enabled ride hailing such as Uber, Lyft, and the ones on the board here are Tapcar and Lucky to Go, which are going to be coming into place quite soon. The city has the ability to issue business licenses. Our ability to impose items on those licenses are pretty limited. The province deals with the age of vehicles, the accessibility of vehicles. I suppose we could say that the vehicles have to be purple. The province reached out to us as well as other CRD municipalities to find out how we wish to license these businesses, if we want to go after the companies, the individual drivers, etc. And staff are bringing forward a consideration for an exemption. With the exception of a brick and mortar office, where we would require a business license, let's just not bother issuing a license for the individual drivers. Second item is looking at cost recovery. So right now we are part of a perpetual licensing scheme. Colwood and Langford do this, where rather than charging license fees every year, we have a one-time pay, and then businesses can renew their licenses indefinitely, which is great for business friendliness. There's a couple of items here that we lose money on over time, such as transferring a business to a different owner or to a different location, or just updating it to include additional services. So staff at minimum are recommending that we include fees for that, but council has the option to look at other fees and improve our cost recovery as well. Up on the slide here is an example of proposed fees and what our cost recovery could be under that model. For temporary use permits, in August of this year, council enabled temporary use. It's an option to go and try out essentially a zone on a trial basis, and this could be used by businesses. And we do have an active application down in Royal Bay for a pop-up coffee shop. The issue here is that we issue a perpetual license that is indefinite, and we're issuing it to a business that could be there for 3, maybe 6 years. Little twist on the bylaw would allow us to issue a license that sunsets with the expiry of a temporary use permit. Intercommunity licensing. Right now, Colwood participates in what's called an intermunicipal license agreement. So a contractor who is mobile in their business gets one license through Colwood and doesn't need additional licenses in other municipalities. They accept one. The province has suggested we might want to participate in an island-wide model. Currently, there's 12 participating municipalities. There's another 12 that are considering it, and this would open up opportunity for Colwood businesses to potentially work all up and down the island. And lastly is the policy for refusals and cancellations. This is to bring some clarity to how staff are going to be treating licenses that we can't approve, and providing some confidence to the public that we're going to be fair and impartial, and providing a clear path to appeal decisions they may disagree with. So once again, there's essentially 4 motions here. The first is to update the business license bylaw with the provisions of exemptions, fees for updates and transfers, and temporary use permits. The second is to participate in the intercommunity licensing agreement. The third is to provide that staff policy for refusals, suspensions, and cancellations. And the last and optional one for council is to look at increasing fees to improve cost recovery across the board. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Provide this opportunity right now for the public to comment on this presentation. Seeing none, I'll look for a mover. Councillor Jensen.
I'll move that. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and that will include the optional motion as well. So that's A, B, C, and the optional tables of license fee updates.
Thank you very much. I'll take it to committee for discussion. Councillor Day.
Thank you. One of the issues that the Intermunicipal Advisory Committee on Disability Issues has struggled with is the lack of availability of accessible taxis and transportation options within Colwood. And that was really illustrated at one of our committee meetings. Our member from Souk, who uses a wheelchair, had arrived by accessible taxi, assuming that she would be able to get an accessible taxi at the end of the meeting, and she was not. She ended up having to stay overnight at a friend's house in the area and take a taxi to get back here to her wheelchair, and then proceed from there to her work downtown on transit. So needless to say, it was a very long day, and I've been on council now for 17 years, and in 17 years, I think probably a handful of times, we've written letters specifically outlining the need for accessible transportation on every taxi license application that's ever come through, and yet really very few improvements have been realized in all that time. So I'm just speaking to the need for, I think last year around Christmas time, we got a letter sent to council outlining concerns because in attending a Christmas party, I think somewhere downtown, they had utilized transit so that they would be doing the responsible thing, expecting that they could get a taxi, and this is not even an accessible taxi, when they got out here, only to find that because of the busy time of year, there were no taxis available out here. So it is a real issue for our community. It's not something that's imagined. And I would really, I see that we're moving away from having any opportunity even to comment on those taxi licenses, which may or may not matter. It hasn't changed anything in the last few years. But it is something that I think the community needs and that we should speak up for. So I don't know if you have any suggestions for things that we could do with our business licensing that would help to address those issues, the availability of regular transit in peak times that is outside of the bus service, and also the availability of accessible transit within Colwood.
Thank you for the comments. We will still have the ability to comment on taxi licenses. With the TNS services, which is what the province is referring to for ride hailing, they do have some policies around accessibility. I'll be happy to get that information and distribute that to council. My recollection is that it is vehicles must be accessible, or there's a surcharge that the province takes, and presumably that would go into funding accessible options.
Councillor Parkinson.
Just for clarity, I think I understand intermunicipal licenses, they're sort of CRD wide. Would intercommunity licenses just be exactly the same but for the whole island?
That is exactly what that is, and theoretically, if we get all the CRD municipalities buying into it, we can then opt out of the intercommunity licensing program and then just fully do it all through the intercommunity one.
And are fees standardized under those scenarios?
There's some flexibility there. I'll have to go to the item in. So if you look on table 6 of the reports, we've got some proposals as to how we might want to deal with that locally, and it would be essentially tagging on a $50 charge to any home-based occupation where there's an intercommunity component, or $50 onto any commercial charge. Similarly with intercommunity, because there's a little bit more scope to that, $70 as opposed to $50, because we're speaking to quite a few more communities.
I guess my question was, somebody buying an intercommunity license in Courtenay, would they pay the same rate as somebody in Colwood, or is this where we're going to compete for more business licenses by being $5 cheaper?
Presumably, we already have that edge in competition because our licenses are perpetual, and apart from Langford, no one else offers that. Every other municipality requires you to pay annually, whereas we say, you've gone through this process once, click a button online and let us know you're still here. I'm not sure how much that's going to draw businesses in, but the idea with the intercommunity licensing is that we only issue it to a business that has an office location in Colwood. So we're not going to have folks in Courtenay-Comox saying we'd like to come to Colwood, even though we could go to Courtenay. They would have to physically move here to benefit from our licensing scheme.
Thank you. Mayor Martin.
Thank you. For the most part, I'd like to just focus a little bit on financial implications of this. I'm actually supportive of the motions this evening, so I will be supporting the motions. But first of all, okay, I'm going to pick on my cannabis first. If we can go on, if we look at 3.6, 3.6, and when we talk about cannabis licensing, basically the recommendation coming out of staff is that they're recommending for us to follow the same model of SANage, which basically is a general commercial of 100 to 200, whereas you go along the spectrum, and that's basically the lowest of the lows. And you get to Vancouver, and they're charging $33,000 for the same permit that we're talking about charging $100 for. And it would seem to me, and in addition to that, what is not in the report, and I would be interested in knowing from staff, and if staff don't know the answer today, that's fine, but if the staff could report back, Langford has just opened their first cannabis store, and I'm curious what they're licensing, what they charge to that first cannabis, and I would like that included in the report because I've heard that that number is higher than $33,000. So I certainly question that we are considering only a permit of $100 to $200 for cannabis. Do you want to comment on that first before I move on?
So our fees are supposed to be based off of the cost that we assume. We're not supposed to be making money off of it. With Vancouver and Victoria, they adopted fees prior to the province stepping in. So these fees might potentially be too much because they were basing it on anticipated enforcement costs with many of the rules that the province now undertakes. With all of our other licensing, we base it off of our initial processing costs as opposed to assumed over the course of a business's lifetime. It may have so many complaints, so therefore it needs a higher rate. Ultimately, this was something that we felt was defensible based off of how we process other license applications. For Langford, I will have to get the specific about what they charge for a cannabis license, but they do have a different program where they have enabled cannabis through a temporary use permit, which enables council to tag on conditions of that temporary use.
Thank you.
Which may include fees.
Yeah, and I think a part of this becomes semantics around what is the true costs to a community. And I would suggest that if we have a cannabis store, the true costs of having a cannabis store within Colwood will be more than $100. That would be the first thing. The second thing, looking at Table 1, current cost recoveries, you've acknowledged, other than outside of non-resident, we are not at a cost recovery of 100% at any of those. I understand, the second paragraph basically states, well, 100% cost recovery target is ideal. Staff note that the current fees are consistent with adjacent municipalities, Table 3. Therefore, staff only recommend that fees be established at the 50% recovery targets. I understand that there are some that we are not going to be able to recover on. So, for example, the license transfer or ownership, which is a $43 cost to the city, and since we have a perpetual license, I understand that we will not be recovering those costs. But I would struggle with the rest of them. So, for example, the home occupancy, our cost as a city is $143, but our fee is only $50, and that's only a 35% cost recovery, which means that we're burdening the taxpayer on all those additional costs. So I would say that and I guess since I have an opinion that I believe that we should tighten these numbers up, when would this committee have an opportunity to look at those, or is that just tonight and that's it for a kick of the can?
So on Table 6, there's a number of proposed costs where staff were trying to balance what other municipalities do with our cost recovery.
Yep.
Some of those range lower, some of them range higher. Council can choose to say we'd like all of these at 100%, we'd like all of these at 75%. Theoretically, council could also choose to not issue business licenses, period. Regional districts aren't allowed to issue business licenses unless they get ministry approval. So theoretically, they have no costs with issuing licenses because they don't have a licensing program. I'm, however, not aware of any municipality that's taken up that.
I'm sorry, through the chair, I should be always talking through the chair. So even if I go to table 6 and I look at home occupancy, in table 1, we've already identified that our cost as a city is $143, but we're choosing not to have a 100% recovery rate. We're choosing not to do that since we know what our cost is. I just want to be really clear on that we're choosing not to recover.
That is correct. The fees there are basing it off of the average licensing costs. So it's our administrative costs, not enforcement. If there's enforcement issues, that can typically be dealt with through ticketing, where we do recover costs that way. This is purely the staff component of reviewing licenses and either signing a letter that says, yes, you're approved, or sorry, it doesn't quite work in the context of your zone.
All right, thank you.
Just one quick question from me, Richard. What are we talking about in dollars, in terms of dollars for this, though? I mean, in reality, we're not popping up a new business every week or every 2 weeks or every month even, I bet you, in Colwood. So just trying to put everything in context here.
So we did try and put a bit of a context statement in section 6. As of September 12th, we had issued 63 new business licenses for this calendar year. And table 5 shows the total costs and total fees. And overall, when you add everything up, we got around 70% cost recovery, just based off of the types of application that's come in. Those can fluctuate a little bit depending on what we get. Sometimes we get more home-based, sometimes we get more non-resident, and those will drive the costs up and down.
Dollars then. Stuart?
Through you, if I may. I think the mayor worried me, and then maybe you settled out my worries. Because if we're giving a perpetual license to, say, a cannabis shop for $100, and it does turn out to be a problem, we wouldn't recover costs, except then you said something about if there's tickets or enforcement, we would recover costs. So I guess my question is, if it turns out to be a problem, are we going to end up to be more or less whole in the long run?
Through the chair, it's really important to separate out the cost of enforcement or the cost of regulatory factors with the administrative cost of receiving and issuing a license. So never is, and that's why I've asked to step in, never is the cost of issuing a cannabis license actually to deal with any implications that may be from that cannabis outlet. Same with the home-based business, quite frankly. If it drives residential complaints, which end up being dealt with by bylaw, there would be ticketing measures that be in relation to those, whether they be parking or enforcement. The extraneous costs about a cannabis store, though, are very difficult to measure because they would typically follow not just to bylaw, but also to theoretically RCMP and whatever mechanisms they have or the abilities there. So I need to bring down the scope of the consideration here to simply taking in that piece of paper, running that through the administrative staff that's necessary, bringing forth the consideration that's brought forward by staff in the referral process, and then issuing that license. That paper exchange is the cost of recovery that we're talking about here. And that's why it's a viable option, and some municipalities and regional districts have opted not to charge. It's to encourage the business opportunities without the impediment of $100 here or there. It seems that it's only a 70% cost recovery at best.
Councillor Day.
Thank you. I just wanted to draw our attention to, there's been some big changes in the world with the legalization of cannabis. And I was just watching, I can't even remember the name of the program, but a factual program about what the largest users are and the highest rate of use of medicinal cannabis is seniors dealing with health issues. So, I know that we have a historical way of looking at marijuana in terms of potential problems and cost drivers and RCMP issues and that type of thing. But it is also a real benefit to the community if we don't have to go somewhere else to do the things that we need to do to live our lives comfortably. So I just wanted to sound a slight cautionary note that I certainly do believe that we want to promote business within Colwood and that we want to provide everything for our residents within Colwood that they need in order to live a happy and comfortable life. You know, it might be a windfall in some areas, or perceived to be a windfall, but that could be easily taken away through a court challenge and showing that the costs aren't necessarily there. So I just think we have to be mindful of trying to stay up with the times in terms of what the real implications are.
Okay, on that note, I'm going to call the question. All those for? Unanimous. And to the item 7, final public participation. At this point in time, I would like to offer a final opportunity for the public to comment on tonight's agenda items. Anyone from the public? Mr. English.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Sorry, this time I'll speak right into the microphone. Earlier we were talking about 360 Latoria. I'd like to come back to that. 360 Latoria, what we've seen is 96% of it is going to be, is planned to be used for residential, high-density residential. So since that's the reality, what we would like, is it possible for us, the public, to make a motion from the floor? Not possible? Oh, okay. How would we, the public, make a motion for something? Is it not
Probably.
allowed, or what? I'm just asking.
Yeah, you could,
Yeah,
you could, I'm sorry.
Go ahead,
No.
sir. I was just going to turn that one over to the CEO for the official response.
Sorry, what's the question?
No, we would like to make a motion for the council and the committee to consider.
So
Is that allowed, or is
well,
that not?
Ultimately, it's the committee that gets to make motions, and then they collectively decide on them. And so if a member of the public has an idea you would like council to put forward, you would recommend that idea to the room, and if one of the councillors took that idea up and made that motion, then it would hit the floor.
Okay, thank you for the clarification. Okay, so what my neighbors and I would like to recommend is that since the reality is that is being talked about at 360 Latoria, it really is high-density residential housing, and it's not going to do anything much at all for the commercial revenue ambitions for the city of Colwood. We actually would like to recommend that the city reduce the height limitation at that property back to 3 stories. It will, the reasons are that will then ensure that whatever's built there will fit in with the neighborhood, which is surrounded by 3-story townhouse buildings, and we won't have this huge building casting shadows over other people's properties, and it won't cause as much traffic and parking issues as would be. So we'd like to see the height restriction lowered back to 3 stories, please. And the other thing we would like to do is note that the parking bylaw that's applicable to high-density multi-high-rise buildings of 2 stalls per unit be applied to that location, because that's exactly what that place is high-density apartment condo-style huge building. So those are that's what we would recommend, and we'd like to see somebody on council move that, and we'd also like to see council approve it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Day.
I just wonder, I wouldn't be comfortable in making a motion like that. Probably no one else would be either, without having staff input on that. So I wonder if council would be interested in hearing from staff on options that we would be able to use to bring forward such an idea, so that we have some idea of what the implications of that would be from our staff.
Point of order, Mr. Chairman. This item was taken off the agenda for good reason. The good reason being that we may be presented with an altered proposal at a future meeting, and that could render moot any resolution made right now. Right now, we'd be making a resolution about a development that may change. And I think what we should do is remember what this recommendation has been made and consider that when we see the actual proposal.
Okay. I would suggest, Mr. English, that, you know, they want to have another public consultation with this, and your ideas are valid ideas. And, you know, I think that can be proposed to the developer at these public consultations. Let them go punch their numbers, and, you know, maybe they will come back to council or to committee of the whole with, you know, this is another alternative for us. So I don't want to circumvent the process here either. So that's how I look at this. Richard, do you have anything to add to, or Dennis, anything to add to this?
Richard's like, no, I don't.
Would it be possible still to hear from staff? I mean, now we're saying that there may be other proposals, but in the meantime, could staff not consider what Mr. English proposed already? In the meantime, I mean, what harm? I guess my question is there any harm in hearing from staff what the recommendation might be and how that may affect council?
Michael?
Given that we've got some time before we see this proposal again, possibly in a different format, it's probably reasonable to give staff time to absorb what's been said and to bring forward comment on it in the next report.
Thank you. Dennis, do you have anything to add to this?
Yeah, I'd just like to sort of reiterate what committee has said at the initial part of the agenda, which is that this matter will be deferred. The applicant has requested that they have a chance to consult with the neighbors and to report back to committee. At that time, staff will also provide some context around issues such as height and parking in a report. So, and I would say, suggest it would also be more appropriate that the staff presentation be done at the same time that the applicant is also here.
Thank you. Dennis, is that okay?
Thank you. Actually, I see it actually as independent. I mean, the applicant can come forward and recommend or request whatever it is he may want to request. What we're doing today is just dealing with what we've seen, and it's all in writing, and you've seen it too. And so all we want to do is just say, well, let's fit it into the neighborhood, and let's, until such time, I mean, they can always come back at some time in the future and ask this council and committee to do something different. But we, as the residents, the taxpayers, and the homeowners, would like to see, if we're talking about high-density residential housing, which is what we are, then if that's the case, then what we should do is we should put in place the same kind of restrictions that currently exist there, and that is nothing higher than 3 stories, and there should be 2 parking slots per unit. So that's our request of this committee and the mayor and council. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you have anything to add? Mr. Earl?
So fundamentally, staff at this juncture are operating from the perspective that the current OCP is council and the community's vision. And then underneath that body of legislation, there's the zoning bylaw. And so to make a change that's been suggested from the floor, both the OCP and the zoning bylaw would need to be changed. And so those are substantive, and a process would have to be enabled for each of those.
Councillor Parkinson.
I mean, if I could just make a comment, I think we've all heard loud and clear what you have to say. I mean, we've all heard that, absorbed that, and if the developer's not in the room, he'll certainly watch all this on video and he'll hear what he has to say before he meets with you, and we'll see where it goes from there. So.
Okay, is there anyone else for public participation?
Thank you, Mayor and Council. I think it's important to know that in general, we're a bunch of pro-development folks. It's also important to think about the value of that development to this tax base. It probably represents about equal to the tax you're getting from the rest of the community. I'm speculating on that. I haven't done the numbers. What's even more important is there's an excellent development going on below Machosen Road that will be high density. There are apartment blocks, or more likely condos, being proposed for there, which feed into the tax base. There's a commercial area there, which will feed into the tax base. So from a point of view of a tax issue, this is not even a starter. Secondly, I just can't imagine a 6-story, actually 3 buildings in that area. You've got to go walk it at 3 o'clock in the afternoon when the school is only half the size it's going to be in another 9 months, or actually almost a year. Double the size of the school. Add that block into there and understand the traffic chaos that's going to be there. Also, it just doesn't fit. When you talk about landscaping on boulevards, or when you talk about public perception of how this community is run, it doesn't fit. Thank you.
Any other public participation?
I just want to add a little bit to my previous comments about the process itself. I know it seems like a good thing, and the developer now want to engage with the community to get more input, which is good. But then, go back to the original question, how would we know, or council know, public really be engaged in a genuine way, in good faith, and it is truly reflected in whatever will be proposed in the future plan. Instead of, some people could play a game with this. They could say, okay, now let's postpone this issue, and then we talk to the community, and then come back to the council and say, now we already talked to the community, so here's what the community says. So the question really is, how would the council know, or the city know, communities' ideas is truly reflected in their future plans? So I think, I don't know if there is a process there to ensure that's really reflected. Okay, thank you.
I certainly don't want to get in an argument, and it's a discussion that I very much appreciate. One of the struggles that I'm having personally with this, from a community standpoint and engaging, is we went through a 2-year process of the official community plan, and we did a lot of public engagement to identify how Royal Bay was going to be built out. I think one of the misperceptions out there is that if you look at Latoria and Ryder Heshtall Way across the road from those locations, that land is considered the commons. So the commons area of Royal Bay is considered the commercial zone of where we will be building out. The 360 Latoria falls within the commons. It is part of the commons, and so it is part of that commercial zone that we were building out. And so if you look at the zoning of what the commons is designed for, it's designed for mid-level 6-story buildings. Everything that's going to get built on Latoria South, which is in the commons area, is going to reflect similar to what that's going to look like, as well as when you start looking at, you go across the street to Latoria Beach will also be higher density. And so I think what's happening right now is, unfortunately, and it's happening to all of us, is that we're looking at this project in isolation, and rather than looking at how does this encompass the entire project. We went through 2 years of engagement from the public, and we had I think it was over 1,200 participants outlining how they viewed Royal Bay to be built out. And that is the leadership and that is the direction that staff have to give to developers. So when developers come in to our community and they're looking at what can and should I be building within certain parcels, what they do is they look at the official community plan. Now, unfortunately, 360 Latoria falls within that commercial zone. And so the developer came in and said, the OCP says X, and so I'm going to try and build out to what the official community plan is outlined. The community clearly tonight has messaged something else, that the community no longer believes that the lands at 360 Latoria should be part of the commons. And that's something that the council will have to consider in the future. So and again, I'm not saying all this as to be argumentative or to have a discussion back and forth. I'm more than happy to have these discussions offline. I just wanted to be clarify that's sort of the direction we're at and the position we're at right now. And so this council will move forward as we go. Sorry, Chair, I didn't mean to take that much.
No, I'd just like to say something, please.
Please.
We attended these meetings when...
Could I get your name?
Oh, I'm sorry. Shelley Gorman. I live at 392 Longworth.
Okay, thank you.
So we attended these meetings. We came many times, and we saw all the billboards and everything with all the fancy buildings and how they were going to do it. And those are the people that bought the property from Lehigh. We were also told that they were not about high density. And they also said, we respect the people who bought their property and built their homes here before we came in. You guys were here first. We bought our property, which was supposed to be our forever home. It's the second home that we've built in Royal Bay. And we were assured at that time that our views, and we've been told we have a jewel of a piece of property. We see everything. With these buildings going up, and I didn't hear anything back then about 6-story buildings going up. But besides that, you know, I also just want to point out about the parking perspective. We live at the end of a cul-de-sac. People come there and park there to wait for their kids to come up from school as it is now, and it's not even open to double the occupancy that it's going to be in another 10 months. There's nowhere for people to park down there now. So I just want you to take into consideration that we were there first, and that should be looked at as well. Thank you.
Thank you. It's your last turn.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair and Council. I do want to. There were a couple comments made that I do need to I think clarify, and a number of us were the people that spent 2 years working on that OCP with the city, and the stickers all around that room there with the convener and the facilitator. So we're not unfamiliar with what was intended. And we totally acknowledge and agree that, in fact, that little corner at 360 Latoria was supposed to be part of the commons, but there was a reason for that should not be forgotten. The reason was it was supposed to be used and to generate significant commercial revenues for the city of Colwood. That's why not to be filled 96% residential. I mean, that's a joke, because it means that the whole intent and purpose as to why that land was zoned and planned the way it was is not going to be met at all. And so if that's the case, what we're saying is that, fine, let's if it's a duck and walks like a duck, let's call it a duck, and let's actually make it designated for high density residential. But if that's the case, we want to see it fit into the community. That means 3 stories. That means 2 spots per unit for parking. So it's a game that's being played by I don't know, a developer is in this to make some money and run away. He won't be here in the long run. Most of us want to be here until we die. We love the city, and we love the Colwood, and we've contributed to it, and we want to continue to do so. But we need to be protected too. And so do and that's all of us. It's everybody in Royal Bay and in Colwood. And I think that what needs to happen is we have to be realistic. If a developer is going to come from the Lower Mainland and say, sure, I'll put in a mixed-use building for you, and if it's 96% residential, there isn't much mixed use there at all, and it sure isn't going to do anything for the city of Colwood in terms of the differential that the city could get in terms of tax revenues from commercial sources. So, like, we need to face reality, and if that's the reality, lower it to fit into the community at three maximum of 3 levels. It's I'm told that it's currently zoned for up to 5. It's not zoned for 6. We sure as hell don't want to see it going any higher. We want to see it reduced. And in the future, if there was a rezoning request to come forward, which actually had legitimate commercial enterprises lined up, which were going to generate more jobs and revenue for the city of Colwood, I think you'd find people would support it. But this looks like a hypocrisy to us, and we're going to be the victims, and that's not right.
Thank you very much. Any final comments?
Actually,
No.
for that piece of land, we have been walking around in the neighborhood quite a bit. And then I also personally participate in quite a few of those open public consultation processes, events. For a long time, honestly, from my perspective, I always see a sign there, and for a long time it says it's a neighborhood house. And then a lot of my neighbors and a lot of people always thinking there's a neighborhood house. And then all of a sudden now we saw a sign there, it's going to be up to 6 levels and apartments. It's pretty surprise to people. So that's why we don't know the whole process, how it goes, eventually got to this stage. And then you see so many people attended at the beginning, they all came for that same thing. And so that's why I want to make sure and the public opinion is truly reflected in here. And then our impression from a long time is neighborhood house not become a monster 6 level in a few buildings blocking so many people's views. At the middle, I went out with some of the neighbors. Some people not even aware there is a potential to have a 6 building. They always think, no, where it come from? That got us surprised. This still just a limited small group of people. If they have more people, I'm sure they don't know it's going to be that. And it's going to have more opinions, I guess, or ideas of people upset when they say those big things come out. So I really seriously want the council seriously consider the potential of this little, although the land is not big, but the impact could be pretty big. Thanks a lot.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, on that note, the next committee of the whole meeting will be on November 18th at 6 p.m. And can I get a motion for adjournment, please? Okay, thank you. All in favor? Okay, unanimous. Thank you very much, everyone, for attending.